Pope Francis delivered an historic apology today to Canada's First Nations people. He said he is deeply sorry for the damage caused by residential schools to First Nations individuals, their families, and their culture, and he begged for forgiveness.
Yeah, but the Pope stopped short of saying that the Roman Catholic Church is to blame for the abuse in residential schools that were run by the Church, which is what First Nations leaders were hoping for. Our coverage of the Pope's first visit to Canada begins tonight with Al Sweeney.
After flying to Canada yesterday, the Pope went to the site of the former Ermineskin Residential School near Edmonton today. He stopped to pray at the school's cemetery, containing the bodies of First Nations children who died at the school. Then, one of the main events of his 6-day visit to Canada, a meeting with First Nations members, many of them residential school survivors.
You also heard of the abuses so many of us have suffered at this and other residential schools.
Mi pedido de perdón.
And the Pope delivered an apology in the place where the abuse was carried out, speaking in Spanish through an interpreter.
Of telling you once more that I am deeply sorry. Sorry.
The Pope has apologized before, when First Nations leaders visited the Vatican in April, where he said he was sorry for the conduct of members of the Roman Catholic Church in the residential schools. First Nations leaders were hoping he would go further this time by accepting blame not just for members of the church, but on the part of the church itself, which ran more than half of the schools. However, the Pope blamed policies of the time, Christians in general, and governments.
Sorry for the ways in which, regrettably, many Christians supported the colonizing mentality of the powers that oppress the Indigenous peoples. I ask forgiveness, in particular, for the ways in which many members of the Church and of religious communities cooperated, not least through their indifference in projects of cultural destruction and forced assimilation promoted by the governments of that time, which culminated in the system of residential schools.
Again, he apologized for the actions of members of the church.
The church kneels before God and implores his forgiveness for the sins of her children.
First Nations members carried a banner with the names of 4,000 children who died in residential schools. As the Pope said, this apology is a first step. He also said the church will investigate what took place in residential schools, although the Federal Truth and Reconciliation Commission's investigation has already concluded there was extensive physical and sexual abuse in the schools and many children died. The commission had called for an apology for the church's role in the residential school abuse. There were other issues the Pope didn't address in his apology today. First Nations leaders are calling for the church to release its records from residential schools. He didn't say anything about that. And after he finished speaking, a woman in the crowd shouted, "Repudiate the doctrine of discovery," which was the 15th century rule that allowed European countries to take North American land from First Nations people. But this is just the first full day of his visit.